Even though most modern full frame cameras are absolutely fantastic in low light conditions, there's still definitely some situations where that larger sensor doesn't cut it unless you're using some other tricks. And recently in December, I took a trip to Tromsø in Norway during polar night season, which essentially means the sun doesn't rise for the entire month. So what I thought I'd do today is just share with you guys a few little tips and tricks in how I got results like this when shooting in almost total darkness, so that you guys can get better results when you are shooting in tricky conditions. Getting straight into it, let's talk about lens choices, since that will inevitably make or break your results when shooting in low light. I actually brought the Lumix S9 out with me to Tromsø, and therefore it made a lot of sense for me to use the S 1.8 primes from Lumix, since they're nice and compact, lightweight, and they fit really nicely with the S9. I brought the 18mm, the 35mm, and the 85mm f 1.8 primes, and they were fantastic because they essentially gave me a really wide focal range while also allowing me to stay at f1.8. The S primes are honestly great to travel with thanks to their small size and lightweight nature, and to be honest, I would normally prefer to travel with a zoom lens since it mitigates the need for multiple lens changes, but honestly I just didn't think the f2.8 aperture would have cut it in polar night conditions, and I can safely say that I was right. A massive strength of Lumix cameras is the fantastic IBIS system, and this definitely comes in clutch when you're shooting in low light conditions, since you're able to lower that shutter speed drastically and still get nice and sharp results. A lot of the images that I took in Tromsø were taken at 1/50th of a second or lower, and there were even some handheld shots that I got where I dragged the shutter all the way down to like half a second. So really don't sleep on the IBIS in low light conditions, and don't be scared to push that shutter speed down, again of course, you know, presuming that your subject isn't moving. You'll still need to have a relatively steady hand to do this, but honestly the IBIS will do a lot of that heavy lifting for you. I'm sure that there's probably some of you guys watching that might be scared to push your camera's ISO up to values like 8,000, 10,000, 12,800, etc. But I'm telling you now that you'll actually get better results exposing properly in camera rather than using a lower ISO value and then just pushing that image in post. And there's also a lot you can do in editing to get rid of a lot of that noise. Lightroom now has a fantastic AI denoise feature that generates a new DNG file with a noise reduction applied. And it's really great because you can dial this into taste, and it does a fantastic job of getting rid of distracting noise in the darker areas of your image, all the while allowing you to retain as much detail as possible. If you're not planning on shooting any moving subjects and instead are more focused on stationary things like architecture or landscape for example, then you should definitely consider bringing a trusty tripod. Of course, they're tried and they're tested, and they can be great if your camera doesn't have the best stabilization, all the while allowing you to lower that shutter speed drastically, giving you more light in your image. If you are shooting stills in a low light environment and you're wanting to get the best results as quickly as possible, then I'd also recommend that you shoot in both RAW and JPEG, since that JPEG file will have the noise reduction in camera baked into the file, meaning there'll be less work for you to do if you did just want to quickly grab that image, do a tiny edit, and then post it on socials. But that being said, if you are working with JPEGs, you need to be sure that you're setting your white balance correctly, since you can't push and pull the colors as much as you can with a RAW file, so that's just another thing to think about. This isn't really much of a low light tip per se, but while I was out in Tromsø, I was really enjoying the X-pan aspect ratio inside my Lumix S9, which is essentially 65:24, and it gives you that really nice panoramic widescreen sort of cinematic look to your images. And I just think that sometimes it's really good to mess around with your aspect ratio, because sometimes it can give you more inspiration when you're out shooting. When shooting video in low light conditions, it's also extremely important to consider what picture profile you're using. For example, as a Lumix shooter, you may think that Vlog is the be all end all for all video shooting, when in reality that picture profile generally tends to be overexposed slightly, and therefore may not be the best option if you are shooting in tricky conditions. Therefore, I'd recommend that you check out picture profiles such as Natural or Cine D, since they could actually yield better results for you in low light conditions when compared to Vlog. It goes without saying that if you are shooting video and your camera does have a dual native ISO setting, that you should set it to the higher value of the two, because of course that's going to give you more light in your image. And that second value will change depending on what picture profile you're using. So for Vlog, for example, that value is ISO 4000, but for Cine D and Natural it may be different. So I'll put those values up on screen now. Let me know in the comments if there's any little tips or tricks or techniques that you guys use when you're shooting in low light conditions. Again, this video is just some of the techniques that I use when I'm in challenging situations, and I'm sure that input will be very appreciated by the wider community or anyone that does struggle with this style of shooting. If you do own an L-mount camera and you would like a lens that would be fantastic for low light shooting, but you're also not too concerned about weight and size, then definitely check out my recent review of the 50mm f1.4 S Pro, which stands to be one of my favorite lenses available for this system.